In a lavish study, a wealthy man named Carl logs into a dating site and begins watching videos of women. He pauses when he sees a stunning Russian woman named Nina. Captivated, he watches the entire video where Nina talks about herself and her daughter Dasha. She ends her message hoping to find a man who will love and accept both of them. Elsewhere, in a rundown neighborhood in Livny, a drug addict named Anatoly pounds on the door of an apartment building. Nina approaches slowly, disappointed to see how out of it he is. Anatoly insists on seeing his daughter, but Nina refuses. He then asks if he can give the bread he bought for Dasha. As Nina opens the door, Anatoly forces his way in. She desperately tries to stop him, but he slaps her and threatens her life. With all her strength, Nina pushes him out and locks the door behind him. Dasha runs down the stairs and asks her mother why her father hates them. Nina gently explains that Anatoly is struggling with his own problems. She reassures Dasha that things will get better. Later, Nina receives a heartfelt message from Carl, apologizing for moving too fast and asking her to call him. Meanwhile, Dasha, brushing her teeth, sighs in frustration when no water comes out of the faucet. Soon after, Nina begins packing for their flight to America, where she plans to marry Carl. Her sister warns her about the man, especially since Nina hasn't met Carl yet. Nina defends her fiancé, mentioning that he dislikes flying. Seeing how determined Nina is, her mother hugs her and tells her to call her uncle for help. Hours later, Nina and Dasha board a plane and land in America. When they step off, they are greeted by two older men. One holds a sign with their names, while the other holds a bouquet of lilies, Nina's favorite flower. Carl watches them, while Hagen, the house steward, avoids looking at them. As they drive to the estate, Nina notices Hagen watching them in the rearview mirror, so she asks Carl about him. Carl explains that Hagen was adopted by his father and works as a house steward. When they arrive at the mansion, Dasha is amazed by its size and compares it to a castle. Carl tells her that they keep the house stocked during winter since it's in a remote area. Dasha asks about Hagen, and Carl explains that he prefers to live alone in a barn nearby. Inside the mansion, Carl introduces them to Maria, the maid, who warmly greets them, especially Dasha since Maria doesn't have children of her own. Carl carries their luggage to their rooms and tells them that he has already asked Maria to buy new clothes for them. They walk upstairs, and Dasha is impressed by the many rooms. Nina points to a room on the far left and asks about it. Carl says it's Maria's private space. Then he shows Dasha her new room, and she is excited, especially about the water in the faucet. Meanwhile, Carl leads Nina to their room. She tells him she feels sad that she couldn't introduce him to her family in person. Carl repeats that he's terrified of flying, as it means trusting someone else with his life. While Nina talks to Carl, Dasha wanders and finds another child's room. At the same time, Carl gives Nina a phone to contact her family. Suddenly, a dog named Rain approaches Dasha, and she hides in the closet, where she sees a woman standing behind her. Dasha screams in panic, and her parents rush to her side. Carl sends the dog away, while Nina comforts her daughter. Dasha says there was a woman in the closet, so Nina checks the area but only finds a mannequin dressed in a wedding gown. Carl explains that it's his ex-wife's wedding dress. When Nina asks what room they're in, Carl says it's his son's room. That evening, he explains that his son had a genetic illness that caused his organs to fail from birth. The stress took a toll on both him and his ex-wife, and she eventually left without saying anything. Suddenly, the power flickers, and strange noises are heard. Carl explains that it's just the old generator acting up. Nina tries to reassure Dasha, encouraging her to accept the changes, but Dasha insists the house is haunted. Nina brushes it off, kisses her daughter goodnight, and tells her not to worry. Later that night, Nina calls her mother to check in. The next day, they have their wedding. Carl introduces Nina to his old friend, Buchanan, his cousin Claire, and his nephew Keller, who is training to be a surgeon. Afterward, Olga, Carl's close friend, gives a speech congratulating them for finding each other after Tyler's death. At the after-party, Cranston, Carl's colleague from the plastic surgery clinic, is introduced to Nina. Meanwhile, Yuri, Nina's uncle, uses the opportunity to criticize Carl for a patient's death. The group defends Carl, explaining that the patient had been given a depressant, then a stimulant, which caused her heart to fail. While the adults talk, Dasha notices a girl making threatening gestures but ignores it. Yuri decides to leave, avoiding a blizzard, despite Nina's invitation to stay. Later, as Nina prepares for their first night together, she catches Carl using powder in the bathroom. Disappointed, she warns him not to let Dasha see this side of him. The next day, a truck crashes into Yuri's car, sending it into a tree, and Hagen burns him alive. Nina, now Carl's mistress, offers to fix the pulley lamp and asks Maria about Carl's secret hobby. Maria explains it helps Carl cope with his emotions. That evening, Dasha develops a fever. Carl is upset about missing their planned horseback ride, but Maria suggests the couple go while she stays behind with Dasha. The next morning, Carl angrily cuts a saddle in the barn. Meanwhile, Maria prepares tea for Dasha, unknowingly adding medicine. Dasha sees her parents riding but doesn't notice Nina's saddle has been tampered with. As Dasha drinks the tea, the power flickers and the door creaks open. Carl, riding with Nina, causes her horse to panic. Dasha, scared, runs outside, and Nina is thrown from her horse, crashing into a tree. Carl, ready to strike Nina with a stone, sees Dasha faint on a frozen lake and rushes to save her. Nina wakes up to find Dasha in danger. They shelter from a blizzard while Maria warms Dasha. Afterward, Nina asks Dasha about the accident, and Dasha claims a ghost warned them about Carl. Nina dismisses it, but later finds Carl indulging in his disturbing hobby. They argue about the accident, but a police officer interrupts, delivering news of Yuri's death. Nina, still grieving her uncle, is distracted while cooking dinner for Carl. She hears Rain growling behind her, throws some meat outside, and notices a message on the window with Hagen standing outside. Feeling uneasy, Nina goes to the barn and finds her saddle slashed. When Hagen arrives, she asks if he wrote the message, and his reaction confirms it. She asks if they're in danger, but he quickly leaves without answering. Later, Carl stays the night in Dasha's room, and Nina wakes up to find herself alone. She checks on Dasha and hears noises from Maria's room. Hours later, Nina finds the phone lines cut and learns Carl dislikes her frequent calls. He shows her the only available phone in the study, but she decides not to use it. Carl then asks her to prepare dinner. While cooking, Dasha tells Nina that Carl made her feel uncomfortable the night before. Nina stays calm, telling Dasha to stay away from Carl for now and promises they'll talk later. Dasha spends the afternoon outside, trying to get Hagen to play with her. He tells her he prefers watching old movies. At dinner, the power goes out again. Nina asks Carl where he was earlier, and he says he was checking the generator. When she mentions Dasha's concerns, Carl insists he was just checking her temperature. Nina feels uneasy but doesn't push further. Hagen and Dasha watch Tyler's favorite movie, while Carl confesses to Nina that his wife is causing him problems, making Nina uneasy. He then tells a strange survival story and says he can't go to the hospital. Realizing his instability, Nina decides they need to leave. Meanwhile, Maria and Hagen watch over sleeping Dasha. In the dining room, Nina insists on leaving, but Carl becomes angry and hits her with a vase. Maria insults Nina and mocks Carl for being infatuated with her. Nina wakes up in a cold cellar, begging Carl to let her out. Dasha tries to plead with Carl to release her mother but is dragged away by Maria. Nina searches for warmth and finds a photo of Carl with his family, boots, and his ex-wife's wedding dress. She touches the generator as it starts up, hoping it will warm her. Nina finds a patched wall and breaks through it with a crowbar, discovering a female skeleton behind it. She crawls through a hidden door and finds Rain, the dog, who greets her warmly. Later, Nina confronts Carl with a shotgun, demanding Dasha. Carl taunts her to pull the trigger, but when she hesitates, he shoots both of her hands. Weeks later, Nina wakes up in her room with Maria fixing her IV. Carl enters with lilies, explaining that Nina is being sedated regularly. He reassures her that Dasha is fine and offers her another chance to accept her fate. Carl pushes her wheelchair to Maria's room, where Nina sees Dasha unconscious on an operating table. Carl reveals that Dasha was meant to replace his son, Tyler. Nina is shocked to see Tyler alive. Carl explains that Tyler needs a new heart and lungs, and despite his wealth, he hasn't found a donor. He offers Nina to stand in as Tyler's mother, promising all his properties in exchange for her help, as he won't be around much longer. Unbeknownst to them, Maria overhears and interrupts, telling Carl that the guests have arrived. Carl orders Maria to sedate Nina, and she drags Nina to a room, claiming she'll inherit Carl's properties for her loyalty. Before Nina passes out, Hagen arrives, removes her IV, and secretly takes Dasha away. Nina, barely conscious, sees Dasha escape the car, but Carl confronts them at gunpoint, revealing that Hagen killed Yuri. Carl shoots Hagen as the guests arrive. Maria drags Dasha back inside, and the guests act unfazed. Dr. Gorbinski begins preparing for surgery on Tyler and Dasha. Nina, struggling to move, tries to reach the study. Olga notices something wrong with Tyler's x-rays, and Carl sends her to get the right ones. Nina weakly dials 911, whispering that her daughter is in danger, before collapsing. As she struggles, Carl's jar of powder falls, and she inhales it to fight the sedatives. Olga enters the study, and Nina, now frantic, attacks her. Carl and the others rush in to find Olga's body. Carl notices the broken jar of stimulant powder, realizing that this is how Nina managed to move despite being heavily sedated. Meanwhile, Nina rushes to the storage room to find something to defend herself. She grabs a hammer and a screwdriver, wrapping them in bandages to use as makeshift weapons. Carl and Nina face off, with Carl determined to stop her, but Keller speaks up, asking to return Dasha. Carl scolds him harshly. Meanwhile, Dr. Gorbinski, feeling uneasy, steps outside for a cigarette. Maria checks on him, leaving the children alone. While her attention is elsewhere, she doesn't notice that Dasha's anesthesia mask has shifted. Dasha wakes up and, guided by the ghost, runs to find her mother. Just as Dasha spots Nina, Nina charges at Cranston and attacks him without hesitation, ending his life. Nina, now back inside, orders Rain, the dog, to attack any intruders. The dog obeys, taking down one of the guests, while Nina deals with another. Keller tries to escape, but Nina swiftly pounces on him. The surgeon apologizes for everything that has happened, but Nina's anger ends him too. Dr. Gorbinski prepares to leave, but Nina catches up with him and deals with him as well. She then enters the operating room, only to find that Dasha is no longer there. Maria suddenly attacks Nina with a medical saw, but Nina fights back with all her strength, eventually overpowering her. She quickly starts searching for her daughter. The effects of the stimulant begin to wear off, and Nina, exhausted, collapses on the stairs. Carl finds her there and coldly announces that her heart will soon give out. As he slowly approaches with a katana, he expresses how disappointed he is in her, accusing her of trying to hurt his son. Just as Carl is about to strike, Dasha appears, pointing a shotgun at her stepfather. Nina tells her to run, but Carl tries to convince Dasha to help Tyler instead. In that moment, Nina spots the old pulley lamp hanging above them. With her last bit of strength, Nina manages to hit it, and the large lamp crashes down on Carl. Dasha quickly runs to her mother, and they embrace, relieved to be together. Meanwhile, Tyler's mother's ghost watches over her son as the power in the mansion goes out, causing Tyler's respirator to stop. Soon after, the police arrive at the mansion just as the storm begins to clear and the sun rises.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.